It takes a lifetime to build a legacy and only a few bad signatures to destroy it. You are going to learn about the wildest spending habits in history. We are talking about monthly expenses that cost more than your entire house. But the scariest part is not the spending, it is the betrayal. One star on this list was robbed blind by his own parents. 1. MC Hammer. You see, there was a time in the early 90s when you could not turn on a radio without hearing this man. He was the king of the world and sitting on top of a mountain of cash estimated at $33 million. That is a lot of money today, but back then it was an empire. However, the thing nobody tells you is that maintaining an empire costs more than building one. Hammer did not just spend money, he set it on fire. He built a mansion in Fremont, California that cost $30 million. This place was not just a house, it was a theme park. It had a bowling alley, 2 swimming pools, and Italian marble floors that cost more than most regular homes. But here is the kicker. He had gold plating on his front gates. Literally, the man was guarding his house with gold. But the spending did not stop at the house. Hammer believed in taking care of his friends. He had an entourage of 200 people. Imagine that, 200 people on your payroll. He was paying for their food, their travel, and their lifestyles. It is estimated that his monthly payroll alone was $500,000, that is $500,000, leaving the bank account every 30 days just to pay his crew. He also bought 17 luxury cars and a private jet. And if that was not enough, he bought 19 thoroughbred racehorses. Horses are expensive to buy, but they are even more expensive to keep. By 1996, the dream was over. He filed for bankruptcy with $13 million in debt. He went from living in a gold-plated palace to living in a much smaller situation. He proved that you can make millions, but if you spend millions plus $1, you are broke. But if you think spending $500,000 a month is crazy, wait until you hear about the man who spent that much just on pigeons and cats. 2. Mike Tyson. The name Mike Tyson means power. In the ring, he was unstoppable. He earned over $400 million during his career. That is nearly $500 million. You would think it is impossible to spend that much money in one lifetime, but Mike took that as a challenge. The thing many overlook is that Mike did not have anyone to tell him no. He spent money on things that do not even make sense to regular people. He famously bought Bengal tigers. These were not house cats. They were wild animals that cost thousands a month just to feed and house. He had a bathtub that cost $2 million. Just imagine washing your face in a tub that costs more than a luxury hotel. His monthly expenses were reported to be around $400,000. He had a habit of buying cars for strangers and friends. He would walk into a dealership, point at 5 cars and say, "I will take them all." But the biggest drain was the legal trouble. His divorce settlement cost him $9 million. Then there were the lawyers and the managers taking huge percentages of his earnings. By 2003, the champ was down for the count. He filed for bankruptcy, claiming he was $23 million in debt. He was so broke he could not even pay for his tigers anymore. He had to sell everything, including his mansion, just to get by. It was a total collapse of a financial giant. But while Mike spent his money on tigers, the next celebrity on our list lost his fortune because he tried to become a business mogul and failed in the most public way possible. 3. 50 Cent Curtis Jackson, known to the world as 50 Cent, was the definition of success. He was not just a rapper, he was a business genius. He made a deal with vitamin water that reportedly netted him $100 million. He was the guy who rapped about getting rich or dying, trying. And for a long time, it looked like he accomplished the first part. But things took a strange turn in 2015. 50 filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The world was shocked. How could the man who made $100 million on water be broke? Well, it turns out that living the high life is expensive. He bought a mansion in Connecticut that used to belong to Mike Tyson. It had 21 bedrooms and 25 bathrooms. The maintenance alone cost $70,000 a month. That is almost $1 million a year just to keep the lights on and the grass cut. But the real blow came from lawsuits. He lost a privacy case that required him to pay $5 million. Then he lost a business dispute over headphones that cost him another $17 million. When the court asked to see his finances, he claimed his assets were equal to his debts. He later admitted that the flashy cars and jewelry he showed off on social media were sometimes rented or borrowed. It was a lesson in image versus reality. Just because someone holds stacks of cash in a photo does not mean they own the bank. He managed to bounce back, but it was a close call. However, losing money on bad business is one thing, but losing it because you signed a contract without reading it is a nightmare. Just ask this next singing legend. 4. Toni Braxton. Toni Braxton has a voice that sounds like pure velvet. In the 90s, she was selling millions of albums. Her song Unbreak My Heart was played at every wedding and breakup worldwide. You would assume she was rolling in cash, but the music industry is a tricky place. In 1998, right at the peak of her fame, Toni filed for bankruptcy. It made no sense to the public. She had sold over 40 million records. How was she broke? The truth was in the fine print. Her recording contract was terrible. She was only getting a tiny fraction of the royalties. While the record label was making hundreds of millions, she was reportedly getting a check for less than $2,000 after expenses were deducted. On top of the bad deal, she had a taste for the finer things. She loved expensive home decor. She admitted to Oprah that she had a problem with crockery and houseware. She spent thousands on plates and silverware she never used. She managed to recover, but then she filed for bankruptcy again in 2010. This time it was due to health issues that forced her to cancel shows in Las Vegas. The insurance company refused to pay, leaving her with massive debt. She owed the IRS, the DMV, and even jewelry stores. It shows that talent is not enough if the business side is a mess. Speaking of bad business, our next artist bought a car that cost more than most people earn in 10 lifetimes, and then had to ask for money to buy a meal. 5. T-Pain. If you were alive in the mid-2000s, you heard T-Pain on everything. He invented a new sound and dominated the charts. He was worth $40 million. He had it all, but he was young, and he did not have anyone teaching him about financial literacy. He admitted later that he had no idea how money worked. He thought the money would never stop coming. He bought a Bugatti for $1.2 million. Then he spent another huge amount customizing it. But later he sold it for just $800,000. He was losing money on every deal. He famously wore a chain that said "Big Ass Chain," which cost him $400,000. It was a joke, but an expensive one. He was spending recklessly on jewelry, cars, and parties. Then the hits stopped coming as fast. The phone stopped ringing. At his lowest point, he had to borrow money just to buy his kids Burger King. Imagine having a Bugatti in the driveway but no cash for a Whopper. He had to fire his staff and learn how to record his own music again. He eventually found a new path through streaming and gaming, but he learned the hard way that a $40 million fortune can disappear if you treat it like monopoly money. But at least T-Pain only hurt his own wallet. The next star on our list had a legal battle that drained a $100 million empire completely dry. 6. R. Kelly. This section discusses a man who had massive success, but faced serious consequences for his actions. Robert Kelly was one of the biggest songwriters in history. He wrote hits for Michael Jackson and had his own massive career. His net worth was estimated at over $100 million at his peak. But legal trouble is the fastest way to drain a bank account. For decades, he faced allegations that required expensive lawyers. Millions of dollars went to legal teams to keep him out of prison. He also had a very complicated personal life. He had to pay huge amounts in child support and settlements. In 2019, everything collapsed. He was facing serious charges, and he could not tour to make money. The record label stopped working with him. The streaming services removed his music from playlists. His income stream dried up instantly. When he appeared in court, he told the judge he had less than $600 to his name. He owed hundreds of thousands in back child support. He went from flying in private jets to being unable to pay rent on his studio. It was a total financial and reputational destruction. He lost his freedom and his fortune. But while legal fees are a huge drain, sometimes the problem is just having too many children to support, which is exactly what happened to this next rapper. 7. DMX Earl Simmons, known as DMX, was the rawest energy in hip-hop. He was the only artist to have his first 5 albums debut at number 1. He sold over 70 million records. He was a movie star. He should have been set for life. But DMX had demons. He struggled with substance issues for most of his life. These habits are not cheap. They drain your money and your ability to work. He was also a father to 15 children. Child support for 15 kids is a financial burden that even a millionaire struggles to carry. He also had major issues with the IRS. He did not pay his taxes for years. The government does not forget. They came for him, and he ended up owing $1.5 million. He had to serve time in prison for tax evasion. When he passed away in 2021, the court documents revealed a sad truth. His estate was estimated to be worth less than $1 million, and some sources said he had almost nothing liquid. He was an icon who generated hundreds of millions for the industry, but he left the world with very little financial legacy. It is a tragic reminder that you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of your money. And speaking of the IRS, our next actor thought he could outsmart the tax man, and he paid a heavy price for it. 8. Wesley Snipes. Wesley Snipes was the coolest action star in the world. He was Blade. He was in major blockbusters. At his peak, he was earning huge paychecks for every film. He amassed a fortune of around $200 million over his career. But Wesley listened to the wrong advice. He started following a group that believed paying taxes was optional. They had a theory that the government had no legal right to tax income. Wesley stopped filing his returns. He thought he had found a loophole. The IRS did not agree. They investigated him and found he owed $23 million in back taxes. That is a staggering amount of money. They charged him with tax evasion. He fought it in court, but he lost. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison. While he was locked up, he could not make movies. His income stopped, but the interest on his debt kept growing. He lost his homes and his status in Hollywood. When he got out, he had to work his way back up from the bottom. He is working again now, but he lost years of prime earning time because he thought he was smarter than the tax system. But at least Wesley lost his own money. The next star on our list lost his fortune because he insisted on carrying it around in garbage bags. 9. Allen Iverson, known as The Answer, was one of the most exciting basketball players to ever step on a court. He signed contracts worth over $200 million. He had a lifetime deal with Reebok. He had it all. But Iverson lived life in the fast lane. He was incredibly generous to his friends and family. He traveled with a massive crew, but his spending habits were chaotic. There are stories that he did not like banks. He would reportedly keep huge amounts of cash in garbage bags in his house. He was also a legendary spender at restaurants and clubs. There is a famous story that he spent tens of thousands of dollars at a TGI Fridays. Not a fancy steakhouse, but a chain restaurant. He would just buy everything for everyone. By 2012, during the divorce hearing, he pulled out his pockets and shouted that he did not even have money for a cheeseburger. He told the court his monthly expenses were $360,000, but his income was far less. He had burnt through a massive fortune. Luckily for him, a friend at Reebok had set up a trust fund that he cannot touch until he is 55, which will save him. But until then, he had to learn to live on a budget. But while Iverson was spending on friends, our next star was being robbed by the person she trusted most in the world. 10. Latoya Jackson. Being a Jackson means you are musical royalty. Latoya had her own career and success in the 80s. She made millions from her music and appearances, but she fell into a trap that happens to many women in the industry. She married her manager. Her husband took complete control of her life and her finances. He cut her off from her famous family. He made bad business deals and allegedly took her money for himself. She was working constantly but seeing none of the rewards. By the early 90s, she was in deep trouble. The debts piled up from failed projects and mismanagement. She had to file for bankruptcy in 1993. She revealed that she was living in an abusive environment where she had no say in how her money was spent. She eventually escaped the marriage, but she left with nothing. She had to rebuild her life from zero. She even worked as a Psychic Friends Network spokesperson just to pay the bills. It was a humble fall for someone from the most famous family in music. She eventually reconnected with her family and got back on her feet, but she lost decades of wealth. Speaking of losing money on bad equipment, our next comedian went broke because he thought he needed to own everything. 11. Sinbad. Sinbad was one of the biggest comedians in the 90s. He was in movies like Jingle All the Way and had his own TV show. He was everywhere. He was making serious money. But Sinbad had a problem with beer. He admitted that he kept filing for bankruptcy because he made terrible business investments. He filed once in 2009 and again in 2013. The second time, he claimed he had $11 million in debt and only $130,000 in assets. So where did the money go? He said he spent a fortune on high-tech audio and video equipment. He wanted to have his own studio facilities, but he bought the equipment and then never used it to make money. It just sat there losing value. He also owed a massive amount to the IRS. He told Oprah that he did not buy Ferraris or live wild. He just invested in things that did not pay off and ignored his taxes. He said, "I spent money on business and the business did not work." It is a classic case of trying to expand too fast. He is still a legend, but his bank account took a heavy hit. But even Sinbad could not predict his financial future, which is ironic because the next lady on our list was the face of the Psychic Friends Network. 12. Dionne Warwick. Dionne Warwick is a legend. She is the cousin of Whitney Houston and has sold over 100 million records. She has been famous since the 60s. But in 2013, she filed for bankruptcy. She listed her liabilities at nearly $10 million. The majority of this was taxes. She owed the IRS and the state of California millions. She claimed that her business manager had mishandled her finances. This is a common story. An artist focuses on the art and trusts someone else to pay the bills, and the bills never get paid. She famously had practically no cash left. She had to list her assets, which included 2 fur coats and some diamond earrings. It was a sad state for such a dignified lady. Dionne blamed the mismanagement, but the government holds the individual responsible. She had to work well into her 70s to try and clear the mess. She eventually paid off the tax liens, but it took years of grinding and she should have been retired. It shows that you have to watch your own money, no matter how famous you are. But if you think managers are bad, wait until you hear about parents who steal from their own children. 13. Gary Coleman. Gary Coleman was the star of Different Strokes. He was the highest paid child actor on television in the late 70s. He was making $100,000 a week. That is huge money now, but back then it was astronomical. He famously said the line, "What you talking about, Willis?" And the world loved him. His parents set up a trust fund for him. It was supposed to hold his money until he was an adult. He worked for years, assuming his fortune was growing. But when he turned 18 and went to access his money, he found a shock. Most of it was gone. His parents and his lawyers had taken almost everything. They had paid themselves huge salaries and fees. He sued them and won a judgment for $1.3 million, but it was a fraction of what he had earned. He struggled to find work as an adult actor. The medical bills for his kidney condition also drained his finances. In 1999, he filed for bankruptcy. He ended up working as a security guard just to make ends meet. He passed away with very little to his name. It is one of the saddest stories in Hollywood history. But while Gary was robbed, our next group was trapped in the worst contract in music history. 14. TLC was the biggest girl group in the world in the mid-90s. They had the #1 album, Crazy School. They were selling millions of copies. They were on MTV every hour. You would think they were millionaires. But at the Grammy Awards, they shocked everyone. They announced they were broke. In 1995, at the height of their fame, they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The world was confused. How can you have the #1 song and be broke? It was the contract. They had signed a deal that charged them for everything. They had to pay for their own hotels, their travel, their food, the studio time, and the music videos. All of that was deducted from their earnings. After selling 10 million albums, they calculated that they each earned about $50,000 a year. That is less than a manager at a grocery store makes. They had to fight legally to get out of that contract. They eventually got a better deal, but they lost the peak earning years of their career to bad paperwork. It changed the way artists looked at contracts forever, but while TLC was underpaid, our next legend gave his money away on purpose until he had nothing left. 15. Little Richard. Little Richard was the architect of rock and roll. He wrote Tutti Frutti and Long Tall Sally. He was flashy, loud, and incredibly successful in the 50s. He made a fortune when rock music exploded. But Richard was a man of extremes. He struggled with his faith and his lifestyle. He would make millions, and then he would decide that rock and roll was evil. He would quit the business and become a preacher. When he did this, he would often give away his money. He would support his church and his friends. He stopped touring, which stopped the income. Then he would run out of cash and have to return to rock and roll to make money again. He did this cycle multiple times. He also had bad contracts in the early days, like many black artists of that era. He did not own the rights to his masters, so he did not get the big royalty checks he deserved. He lived comfortably in his later years, but he was never as wealthy as the white artists who copied his style. He was a king without a kingdom. Speaking of habits that drain the bank, our next singer had a voice of gold, but a struggle that cost her everything. 16. Etta James. Etta James is one of the greatest singers of all time. Her song, At Last, is a classic. But Etta had a very rough life. She started singing young, and she fell into bad habits early. She struggled with severe dependency on heavy substances. This is an expensive problem. It is not just the cost of the substances, but the cost of the lifestyle. You miss gigs, you get sick, you go to expensive rehab facilities. Etta went through periods where she was writing bad checks and getting arrested. She lost her homes and her assets. She faced legal troubles for decades. In the 70s, she was virtually penniless. She managed to make a comeback in the late 80s and 90s, winning Grammys and getting inducted into the Hall of Fame. But she had to work constantly to make up for the lost years. Her story is a reminder that personal demons can eat through any amount of talent and money. But if you think one person having trouble is bad, imagine a whole group falling apart due to egos and lawsuits. 17. The Temptations. The Temptations were the emperors of soul. They had the suits, the moves, and the hits, like My Girl. They were the backbone of Motown. They generated millions of dollars in ticket sales and records. But the group was plagued by internal fighting and bad management. David Ruffin, the lead singer, had a massive ego. He demanded special treatment. He was eventually fired from the group. He died with very little money after struggling with substance issues for years. Other members faced similar fates. Paul Williams, the original choreographer and singer, faced health issues and death. He took his own life in 1973 while owing money. The group name was owned by Motown, not the singers. So when they left or were fired, they lost their income source. They were employees, not owners. It is a harsh lesson in the music business. You can be the face of the brand, but if you do not own the name, you can be replaced. And speaking of volatile relationships, our next entry is famous for a partnership that was as destructive as it was musical. 18. Ike Turner. Ike Turner was a musical genius. He is often credited with recording the first rock and roll song. He discovered Tina Turner and built a massive revue show. They were making huge money in the 60s and 70s, but Ike was out of control. He had a massive problem with substances. He was abusive and erratic. He spent money as fast as he made it on his habits and on maintaining control over everyone around him. When Tina finally left him, his career tanked. He lost his main attraction. He fell deeper into his addiction. He was arrested multiple times and spent time in prison. He lost his studio, his home, and his reputation. He died in 2007. While he had a small comeback late in life, winning a Grammy, he never regained the wealth he had during his peak. He is remembered more for his bad behavior than his music, which is the ultimate loss. But while Ike destroyed his own career, our next actor just had really bad luck with real estate. 19. Boris Kodjoe. Boris Kodjoe is a successful actor now, known for Station 19 and movies. He is a handsome, stable guy. But early in his career, he faced a massive financial scare. He was a model and started getting acting roles. He thought he had made it. He decided to invest in real estate. It seems like a smart move, right? But he bought at the wrong time. He bought expensive properties right before the market crashed. He found himself with mortgages he could not pay. The tenants were not paying rent, but the bank still demanded the money. He was bleeding cash. He admitted later that he was on the verge of bankruptcy. He had to hustle hard. He took every job he could get. He pivoted to reality TV and more consistent television work to dig himself out of the hole. He learned that just because a bank will lend you millions does not mean you should take it. He saved himself, but it was a close call. Our final star, however, made the most money of anyone on this list and still managed to lose it all to the IRS. 20. Chris Tucker. In the late 90s and early 2000s, Chris Tucker was the highest paid actor in Hollywood. After the success of Rush Hour, he negotiated a deal that paid him $25 million for Rush Hour 3. That is $25 million for a few months of work. But after making that huge money, Chris stopped working. He did not make another movie for years. He wanted to be selective. But while he stopped making money, he did not stop spending it. And more importantly, he did not pay his taxes. The IRS hit him with a bill for $14 million. That is a bill that would give anyone a heart attack. He had liens placed on his property. He had to sell his mansions in Florida and California to pay the debt. He eventually went back on tour doing stand-up comedy to generate cash. He made a comeback in the movie Silver Linings Playbook. but he is nowhere near as wealthy as he was when he was the $25 million man. It proves that you can make more money than God, but if you don't give Caesar his share, Caesar will take everything.